My name is Henry, and I'm about to tell you the story of how 35 years of marriage crumbled in the most unexpected way imaginable. I'm 62, Lucy is 60, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew everything there was to know about my wife. I work as a foreman at Fletcher Manufacturing, been there for 28 years, started on the floor and worked my way up. Lucy used to work part-time at the library, but she retired 3 years ago when her arthritis got bad. We raised 2 kids, both grown now with families of their own living across the country. Our life was predictable, comfortable, maybe even boring by some standards. But it was ours. The first crack in our foundation appeared last winter when Lucy started having chest pains. Nothing dramatic, just occasional tightness, some shortness of breath. Our family doctor, old Dr. Peterson, referred her to a cardiologist at St. Mary's Medical Center. Dr. Richard Thornfield. Even the name sounded distinguished. St. Mary's is the fancy hospital on the east side of town, where the wealthy folks go. White marble floors, abstract art on the walls, valet parking. Not our usual scene, but our insurance covered it, and Lucy's health was worth any discomfort I felt in those pristine halls. The first appointment went normally enough. Lucy came home talking about Dr. Thornfield, how young he looked for such an accomplished cardiologist, how thorough he was, how he actually listened to her concerns. After dealing with Dr. Peterson, who barely looked up from his clipboard, this was refreshing. He spent almost an hour with me, Henry, she said, hanging up her coat. Can you believe that? A whole hour. He explained everything about my condition, showed me the test results, even drew little diagrams. I was pleased. Lucy deserved good medical care, especially at her age. The chest pains had been worrying both of us. The appointments were scheduled for every 2 weeks initially. Standard monitoring, Dr. Thornfield had explained. Lucy would leave around noon and return by 4, usually in good spirits. The chest pains seemed to be improving. But then something shifted. It started with small things. Lucy began asking about my work schedule more frequently. Not suspiciously, just casually. When do you work late this week? Or, remind me which days you're on the morning shift? She said she wanted to plan her appointments around my schedule, which seemed considerate. Then the appointments became more frequent. Every week, then twice a week. Is that normal? I asked one evening as she marked another appointment on the kitchen calendar. Oh yes, she replied quickly. Dr. Thornfield likes to monitor new patients very closely. He's very thorough. Some doctors, you see them once and that's it. But he really cares about getting the treatment right. The appointments also started lasting longer. Lucy would leave at noon but not return until 6 or 7 in the evening. When I asked about it, she'd sigh and complain about the wait times. You wouldn't believe the crowd at that place, Henry. Sometimes I sit in the waiting room for hours. But Dr. Thornfield is so popular, you know? All the best doctors are. I noticed other changes too, though I didn't think much of them at the time. Lucy started paying more attention to her appearance. Not dramatically, she wasn't suddenly wearing makeup every day or buying expensive clothes. But she did get her hair done more frequently, bought a few new blouses, started using that perfume her sister had given her for Christmas that had been sitting untouched on her dresser. I'm feeling better about myself, she explained when I complimented a new dress. When you're dealing with health issues, it helps to look your best. Makes you feel stronger, you know? It made sense. Lucy had always been beautiful to me, but I knew she'd been feeling older lately, more conscious of her age. If looking nice made her feel better, I was all for it. The real change, though, was in her mood. 4 months before the heart problem started, Lucy had been somewhat withdrawn. Not depressed exactly, but quiet. We'd settle into our evening routine: dinner, television, bed, with minimal conversation. I attributed it to empty nest syndrome, retirement adjustment, the usual challenges of getting older. But now she seemed energized. She'd come home from her appointments practically glowing, chattering about her day, asking about mine. She started cooking elaborate meals again, something she hadn't done in years. She even suggested we plan a vacation for the summer. Dr. Thornfield says travel is good for heart patients, she said, browsing through a travel magazine. Keeps the spirit active. He's been all over Europe. Says it's never too late to see the world. I was thrilled. This was the Lucy I'd fallen in love with 40 years ago, vibrant, curious, full of life. Whatever Dr. Thornfield was doing, it was working miracles. But then came the phone calls. It started innocently enough. Lucy would get calls in the evening and she'd step outside to take them. It's the doctor's office, she'd explain. They like to follow up, make sure I'm taking my medication properly. The calls became more frequent and longer. Lucy would be outside for 30-40 minutes at a time. When she came back in, she'd be smiling. "They're so attentive at that clinic," she'd say. "Dr. Thornfield really cares about his patients." One evening, I was in the garage working on my workbench when Lucy took one of these calls. She was on the back porch, and with the window open, I could hear fragments of her conversation. Not the words but the tone. The soft laughter. The way her voice got gentle, almost intimate. It was the way she used to talk to me when we were first dating. I told myself I was being paranoid. She was talking to medical staff about her health. Of course she'd be grateful, even warm toward people who were helping her feel better. But a seed of doubt had been planted. 3 months into her treatment, my work schedule changed unexpectedly. The plant had gotten a big rush order and we were working Saturday shifts for 6 weeks. I mentioned this to Lucy over breakfast. "Oh," she said, looking up from her coffee. "Saturdays too?" "Just for a while. Overtime pay will be nice though. Maybe we can put it toward that vacation you've been talking about." She smiled, but something flickered across her face. Relief? Satisfaction? I couldn't quite read it. "That's fine," she said. "Actually, Dr. Thornfield offered to see me on Saturdays if needed. More flexible scheduling. I might take him up on that. Saturday appointments. At a major medical center." It struck me as odd, but I didn't say anything. The first Saturday I worked, Lucy was gone when I got home at 4. She returned around 7, apologizing for being late. "Emergency at the hospital," she explained. "Dr. Thornfield had to handle a crisis, and it threw off all the appointments." I waited because I'd already driven all that way. It sounded plausible. Doctors do have emergencies. But the Saturday appointments became regular. Every Saturday I worked, Lucy had an appointment. Every Saturday she'd be gone for most of the day. 4 months in, I started noticing inconsistencies in her stories. She'd mention waiting in a crowded waiting room, but then later say Dr. Thornfield had cleared his schedule to spend extra time with her. She'd complain about the parking at the hospital, but then mention how nice it was that Dr. Thornfield walked her to her car. Small things, but they nagged at me. The biggest red flag should have been the medication. Lucy was supposedly on a complex regimen for her heart condition, but I never saw her taking any pills. When I asked about it, she said Dr. Thornfield had her on a as-needed basis. "Not like blood pressure medication where you take it every day," she explained. "This is more about lifestyle changes and monitoring. Very progressive approach." I didn't know enough about cardiology to question it, but it seemed unusual. The breaking point came 5 months into her treatment. I was supposed to work late on a Thursday, but the job finished early. Instead of calling Lucy, I decided to surprise her by picking her up from her appointment. Maybe we could grab dinner somewhere nice, celebrate the extra overtime pay. St. Mary's Medical Center is impressive, all gleaming glass and marble, with a circular driveway and professional landscaping. I parked and went to the information desk. "I'm here to pick up my wife," I told the elderly volunteer. "She has an appointment with Dr. Thornfield." The woman, whose name tag read Dorothy, smiled pleasantly. "Oh, I'm sorry, dear. Dr. Thornfield left about an hour ago. He only works until 3 on Thursdays." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "Are you sure?" "Oh yes. I've been volunteering here for 12 years. Dr. Thornfield always leaves early on Thursdays. Has a standing golf game with some colleagues." I thanked Dorothy and walked back to my truck in a daze. Lucy wasn't supposed to be home until 6. Where was she? I sat in the parking lot for an hour trying to make sense of it. Maybe she had seen Dr. Thornfield earlier and was running errands. Maybe Dorothy was wrong about the schedule. Maybe there was another Dr. Thornfield. But deep down I knew something was very wrong. I drove home and waited. Lucy arrived at 6:30, full of apologies about the late appointment and heavy traffic. She described her session with Dr. Thornfield in detail, how they discussed her progress, adjusted her treatment plan, talked about stress management. I listened to every word, knowing it was all lies. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay next to Lucy, listening to her breathing, trying to reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the one who had just looked me in the eye and lied for 2 straight hours. The next morning I called in sick to work. After Lucy left for her appointment, it was Friday, another Dr. Thornfield day according to her schedule. I drove to St. Mary's. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to understand what was happening. The cardiac unit was on the 3rd floor. I took the elevator up and found the waiting area. It was busy, full of older patients and their families. I approached the reception desk, where a middle-aged nurse with kind eyes was handling the check-ins. Her name tag read Margaret. "Excuse me," I said. "I'm trying to understand my wife's treatment schedule." "Lucy Brennan? She sees Dr. Thornfield?" Margaret looked at her computer screen, typed for a moment, then frowned. I'm sorry, Mr. Brennan, but I don't see any appointments for Lucy in our system. Are you sure she's seeing Dr. Thornfield? My heart started racing. She's been coming here for months. Every week, sometimes twice a week. Margaret's expression grew concerned. Sir, would you mind if I asked one of our senior nurses to speak with you? This seems like there might be some confusion. A few minutes later, Margaret returned with another nurse, older, with gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. Her name tag said, Patricia, charge nurse. Mr. Brennan? Margaret tells me you're asking about your wife's appointments with Dr. Thornfield. Yes, Lucy Brennan. She's been a patient here since January. Patricia shook her head slowly. Sir, I've worked with Dr. Thornfield for 8 years. I know all his regular patients. I don't recall anyone named Lucy Brennan. The world tilted. That's impossible. She comes here twice a week. To see Dr. Thornfield specifically? Yes. She talks about him all the time. How thorough he is, how much time he spends with patients. Patricia and Margaret exchanged a look. Patricia motioned for me to follow her to a quiet corner of the waiting area. Mr. Brennan, she said gently, I think there might be some kind of misunderstanding. Dr. Thornfield is extremely busy. He sees patients back to back, usually 15-minute appointments, occasionally 30 minutes for complex cases. He certainly doesn't have time for the kind of extended visits you're describing. But she's here for hours sometimes. From noon until evening. Not with Dr. Thornfield, she isn't. His last appointment most days is at 4. He's usually gone by 4:30. I felt sick. Could she be seeing another doctor? Maybe using the wrong name? Patricia looked sympathetic but firm. Sir, is it possible your wife is not being entirely truthful about where she spends her time? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. I don't understand, I said weakly. Sometimes people, sometimes they tell family members they're somewhere they're not. For various reasons. Usually innocent reasons, she added quickly, though her tone suggested otherwise. I thanked Patricia and left. I sat in my truck in the hospital parking lot, trying to process what I'd learned. Lucy wasn't seeing Dr. Thornfield. She probably wasn't even coming to the hospital. For 5 months, she'd been lying to me about where she spent her afternoons. But where was she going? And with whom? That afternoon, I did something I'd never done in 35 years of marriage. I followed my wife. Lucy left the house at 11:30 as usual. She was wearing one of her new blouses and had spent extra time on her hair. She kissed me goodbye, a quick peck on the cheek, and said she'd be home by 6. I waited 10 minutes, then got in my truck and drove toward the hospital. Lucy's car wasn't in the parking lot, but I hadn't expected it to be. I drove around the area, checking nearby shopping centers, restaurants, anything that might explain where she was spending her time. Nothing. I was about to give up when I spotted her car in the parking lot of the Riverside Inn, a small hotel about 2 miles from the hospital. It was the kind of place that catered to business travelers, and I realized with a sinking heart, people who needed privacy. I parked across the street and waited. At 3:30, Lucy emerged from the hotel. But she wasn't alone. Walking beside her was a tall, distinguished-looking man with silver hair and an expensive suit. He was holding her hand. I watched in stunned silence as this stranger, who I assumed must be the real Dr. Richard Thornfield, helped my wife into her car, then leaned down to kiss her through the open window. Not a peck on the cheek. A real kiss. Lucy sat in her car for a moment after he walked away, checking her appearance in the rearview mirror, smoothing her hair. Then she drove off, presumably to kill time somewhere before coming home to lie to me about her day. I followed the man instead. He got into a black BMW and drove directly to St. Mary's Medical Center, where he parked in a space marked Reserved Dr. R. Thornfield. So it really was him. Dr. Richard Thornfield, the cardiologist who was supposed to be treating my wife's heart condition, was actually sleeping with her. I drove home in a trance. Everything made sense now. The frequent appointments, the improved mood, the new clothes, the secretive phone calls, the Saturday sessions. Lucy was having an affair, and she'd been using her fake medical treatment as cover. When she came home that evening, glowing and chatty, describing her appointment in elaborate detail, I had to leave the room. I couldn't stand to hear another lie. That night I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Lucy yet. I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening. How long had this been going on? Was it serious or just a fling? Did she love this man? More importantly, what did I want to do about it? The next morning, after Lucy left for another appointment, I drove back to St. Mary's. This time, I asked to speak with the hospital administrator. Mrs. Catherine Walsh was a stern woman in her 50s who listened to my story without interruption. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and sighed. Mr. Brennan, this is a very serious matter. If what you're telling me is true, Dr. Thornfield is in violation of numerous professional ethics guidelines, not to mention potentially committing insurance fraud if he's billing for appointments that aren't actually taking place. I don't think he's billing anything. My wife isn't really a patient. That's actually worse in some ways. It means this is purely personal, which makes it completely inappropriate. Mrs. Walsh promised to look into the matter discreetly. She also gave me some advice. Mr. Brennan, I understand this is devastating for you. But before you take any drastic action, you might want to consider getting some help. A counselor, maybe a lawyer. This situation is going to get complicated. I thanked her and left, but I wasn't ready for counselors or lawyers yet. I needed more answers. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a part-time private investigator. I followed Lucy twice more, both times to the same hotel. I timed their meetings, always from noon to 3:30 on her appointment days. I even spoke to the desk clerk at the Riverside Inn, claiming I was thinking of booking a room for an anniversary celebration. "Oh, you'd love the suite on the 3rd floor," the young man said enthusiastically. "We have a regular guest who books it twice a week. Been coming here for months. Says it's the most romantic room he's ever stayed in. Twice a week. For months. This wasn't a casual fling. This was a full-blown relationship." The breakthrough came when I decided to research Dr. Thornfield online. It didn't take long to find information about him. Graduated from Harvard Medical School, fellowship at Johns Hopkins, divorced 2 years ago. Recently divorced. That detail hit me like a physical blow. Lucy was having an affair with a recently divorced man. Was she planning to leave me? Was this whole thing a prelude to ending our marriage? I found more information in local newspaper archives. Dr. Thornfield's divorce had been messy, involving allegations of adultery on his part. His ex-wife had been awarded a substantial settlement, and there had been rumors about his involvement with patients. Patients. Plural. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was uglier than I'd imagined. Lucy wasn't Dr. Thornfield's first affair with a patient. She might not even be his only current one. That night, I couldn't keep up the pretense any longer. When Lucy came home from her appointment, radiant and full of stories about her wonderful doctor, I snapped. "Stop," I said. She paused in the middle of describing some fictional conversation with Dr. Thornfield. "Stop what?" "Stop lying to me." The color drained from her face instantly. "Henry, I don't know what you... I know about the hotel. I know you're not seeing Dr. Thornfield as a patient. I know you're having an affair." Lucy sat down heavily on the couch. For a long moment, we stared at each other across the living room of the home we'd shared for 35 years. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. 2 weeks. But I suspected longer. She nodded slowly. "How did you find out?" I told her about my visit to the hospital, about following her, about the hotel. She listened without interrupting, tears streaming down her face. When I finished, she said, "What happens now?" "I don't know. You tell me. Are you in love with him?" Lucy was quiet for so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. Finally she said, "I don't know. Maybe. He makes me feel alive. Like I matter. And I don't. You're a good man, Henry. You've been a good husband, a good father. But somewhere along the way we stopped being partners and became roommates. When was the last time we really talked? When was the last time you asked me how I felt about anything other than what to have for dinner?" I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. She was right. Our relationship had become comfortable, predictable, maybe even boring. "So you decided to have an affair instead of talking to me about it?" "I didn't decide anything. Just happened. I went to see Richard about my chest pains and he was so attentive, so interested in me as a person. We talked for hours about everything, my dreams, my fears, things I haven't talked to anyone about in years." "Richard." She blushed. "Yes. We became friends first. Then it became something more." "How much more?" Lucy looked me in the eye. "We're lovers, Henry. Have been for 3 months. And yes, we talk about a future together." The word lovers hit me like a physical blow. Bad enough that my wife was having an affair, but to hear her describe it in such intimate terms was devastating. "So what now?" I asked. "Do you want a divorce?" "I don't know. Do you?" I realized I didn't know either. Part of me wanted to fight for our marriage, to suggest counseling, to try to rebuild what we'd lost. But another part of me was already calculating how to divide our assets, wondering where I'd live, thinking about starting over at 62. I need time to think, I said. Lucy nodded. So do I. But time, as it turned out, was a luxury we didn't have. The next morning Mrs. Walsh called me at work. Mr. Brennan? I've completed my investigation into Dr. Thornfield's activities. Could you come in to discuss what we've found? I met with Mrs. Walsh that afternoon. She had a thick file folder on her desk. Mr. Brennan, this situation is far more serious than we initially thought. Dr. Thornfield has been using hospital resources to conduct personal relationships with at least 3 women over the past 2 years. None of them were actual patients, but all of them believed they were receiving medical care. 3 women? Your wife, a divorced woman named Janet Morrison, and a widow named Ruth Peterson. All of them middle-aged, all of them vulnerable in some way. Mrs. Morrison was going through a difficult divorce when she met Dr. Thornfield. Mrs. Peterson had recently lost her husband. I felt sick. So this is what he does? Preys on vulnerable women? It appears so. And there's more. We found evidence that he's been using his position to access private medical information about potential targets. He specifically sought out women who fit a certain profile, recently divorced, widowed, or in troubled marriages. The implications hit me immediately. He knew about Lucy and me? About our marriage? It's possible. Mrs. Peterson mentioned that Dr. Thornfield seemed to know a lot about her personal life before she told him anything. Same with Mrs. Morrison. I felt violated in a way I couldn't even describe. This man hadn't just seduced my wife. He'd researched her, targeted her specifically because he thought she was vulnerable. What are you going to do about it? We're terminating Dr. Thornfield's employment immediately. We're also reporting him to the state medical board and potentially to law enforcement, depending on what our legal team advises. Mrs. Walsh handed me a business card. Mr. Brennan, I strongly suggest you contact this attorney. Her name is Sandra Cole, and she specializes in cases involving medical malpractice and professional misconduct. You may have grounds for a lawsuit. I thanked Mrs. Walsh and left, my head spinning. Lucy wasn't just having an affair. She was being manipulated by a predator who had specifically targeted her. When I got home, Lucy was in the kitchen making dinner. She looked up when I walked in and I could see the anxiety in her eyes. Henry? How was work? I sat down at the kitchen table and told her everything Mrs. Walsh had said. Lucy's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally humiliation. He targeted me, she whispered. That's what it looks like. But he told me he'd never felt this way about anyone before. That I was special. He told the same thing to at least 2 other women. Lucy sank into a chair across from me. I'm such a fool. No, I said, surprising myself. You're not a fool. You were manipulated by someone who makes a living taking advantage of people's trust. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then Lucy asked, what does this mean for us? Was a good question. I was still hurt by her betrayal, still angry about the months of lies. But I was also beginning to understand that she'd been a victim too. I don't know, I said honestly. I need time to process all of this. But again, time wasn't on our side. The next morning my phone rang at 6 a.m. It was Sandra Cole, the attorney Mrs. Walsh had recommended. Mr. Brennan? I apologize for calling so early, but this is urgent. Dr. Thornfield has disappeared. What do you mean, disappeared? He didn't show up for work yesterday. His apartment is empty, his bank accounts have been cleaned out, and his car is gone. It appears he fled sometime Tuesday night, probably after the hospital confronted him about his activities. My blood ran cold. What about the women he was involved with? Are they in danger? We don't think so. But we need to speak with your wife as soon as possible. She may have information that could help us track him down. I woke Lucy and explained what was happening. She was devastated. He's gone? Just like that. It looks that way. She started crying. Not the gentle tears from our conversation the night before, but deep, wrenching sobs. He said he loved me, she said between sobs. He talked about us having a future together. He was going to leave his practice and we were going to travel together. I wanted to comfort her, but I didn't know how. Part of me felt sorry for her, but part of me was still angry about being deceived. Over the next few weeks, the full scope of Dr. Thornfield's deception became clear. He had been systematically targeting and manipulating women for at least 5 years, possibly longer. He'd stolen thousands of dollars from the hospital, falsified medical records, and may have been involved in insurance fraud. The FBI got involved. Lucy was interviewed multiple times along with the other women. The story made the local news, though fortunately the victims' names were kept confidential. Through it all, Lucy was a wreck. She'd been doubly betrayed, first by realizing that her lover was a con artist, and second by facing the consequences of her own actions. Our children called, having heard about the scandal through mutual friends. I had to explain the situation to them, which was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. "Dad, are you and Mom getting divorced?" my daughter asked during one particularly painful phone call. "I don't know, sweetheart. We're trying to figure things out." But slowly, something unexpected began to happen. As Lucy dealt with the aftermath of her betrayal, and as I processed my own anger and hurt, we started talking. Really talking for the first time in years. We talked about how our marriage had grown stale, about how we'd stopped communicating, about how we'd both felt lonely even while living in the same house. We talked about the things we'd lost over the years and the things we still valued. We also started going to counseling, both individually and together. Our therapist, Dr. Martinez, helped us understand how we drifted apart and why Lucy had been vulnerable to someone like Thornfield. Infidelity is rarely just about sex, Dr. Martinez explained during one session. It's usually about unmet emotional needs, about feeling invisible or unimportant in the primary relationship. Lucy nodded through tears. That's exactly how I felt. Like I was disappearing. Like Henry saw me as the woman who did laundry and cooked dinner, not as a person with thoughts and feelings and dreams. It hurt to hear, but I knew she was right. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped seeing Lucy as the vibrant, intelligent woman I'd married and started seeing her as just part of the household routine. "And you, Henry," Dr. Martinez said, "you dealt with your own feelings of disconnection by withdrawing further. Instead of addressing the problems in your marriage, you both retreated into separate lives under the same roof." The counseling was painful but necessary. We had to confront years of neglect, resentment, and miscommunication. Some sessions ended with both of us in tears. Others ended with shouting matches that continued in the car on the way home. But gradually we began to rediscover each other. 3 months after Thornfield's disappearance, Lucy and I took our first vacation together in 15 years. Nothing fancy, just a long weekend at a cabin by the lake. We spent the time walking, talking, and remembering why we'd fallen in love in the first place. "I'm sorry," Lucy said one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I'm sorry for the lying, for the betrayal, for almost throwing away 35 years over someone who was using me." "I'm sorry too," I replied. "I'm sorry for letting us drift apart. I'm sorry for taking you for granted. I'm sorry it took something this dramatic for us to start talking again." Dr. Thornfield was eventually caught in Florida, where he'd been running the same con on women in Miami. He was extradited back to our state, where he faced multiple charges including fraud, identity theft, and professional misconduct. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and lost his medical license permanently. Lucy testified at his trial, along with the other women he'd victimized. It was difficult for her, but she said it felt important to make sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. The experience changed us both. Lucy became more assertive, more willing to express her needs and feelings. I became more attentive, more emotionally present in our relationship. We started doing things together again, going to movies, taking walks, planning small trips. Our marriage survived, but it wasn't the same as before. In some ways it was better. We communicated more honestly, paid more attention to each other, and didn't take our relationship for granted. But in other ways it was more fragile. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild completely. There were still moments when I wondered if Lucy was telling me the truth about where she'd been or who she'd talked to. There were still times when Lucy felt like I was watching her too closely, waiting for her to make another mistake. Dr. Martinez warned us about this. "Recovery from infidelity is possible," she said, "but it requires constant work from both partners. There will be good days and bad days. The key is to keep communicating, keep being honest with each other, and keep choosing to work on the relationship every day." It's been 2 years now since the scandal broke. Lucy and I are still together, still working on our marriage. We've learned to talk to each other again, to pay attention to each other's needs, to not let our relationship drift into complacency. Would I have chosen to go through this experience? Absolutely not. It was one of the most painful periods of my life. But in some strange way, it may have saved our marriage. Without the crisis, we might have continued drifting apart until there was nothing left to save. The other women from Thornfield's scheme have had different outcomes. Janet Morrison moved to another state for a fresh start. Ruth Peterson joined a support group for victims of fraud and became an advocate for other women in similar situations. As for Lucy and me, we're taking it one day at a time. We're older now, more aware of our mortality and the preciousness of the time we have left together. We don't waste as much time on trivial arguments or petty grievances. Every morning, I look at the woman lying next to me and remember that I almost lost her, not to death or disease, but to neglect and complacency. It's a sobering thought but also a motivating one. Our marriage will never be exactly what it was before. The innocence is gone, replaced by a more mature understanding of how fragile love can be if you don't nurture it. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe a little wariness, a little extra effort, is what long-term relationships need to survive. I still love Lucy. She still loves me. And after everything we've been through, we've decided that's enough to build on. The trust is returning slowly like physical therapy after a serious injury. Some days are better than others. But we're both committed to doing the work, having the difficult conversations, and not letting our relationship drift into neglect again. Dr. Thornfield stole 5 months of our lives and nearly destroyed our marriage. But in the end he didn't win. We're still here, still together, still working toward something better. And that, I suppose, is its own kind of victory. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Maybe YouTube will no longer offer you my channel, so subscribe to it by clicking subscribe on the right under the video to receive new interesting stories. Also on the right of the video there is a playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to, and you can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.